Hey everyone, this is James from Italian poliziotteschi and Jolly Reviews. Today I will be reviewing a poliziotteschi, a late era poliziotteschi by Fernando. That is 1977, or sometimes called 1978's Blood and Diamonds. So this one, quick synopsis: a man is arrested for robbery, and after serving his sentence, he aims to get revenge on those he believes set him up. First saw this film in 2020, then I wanted to revisit it just because I did see that this Blu-ray did come out, so I saw it again in 2024. Has definitely a little bit of a lesser reputation than kind of the vintage Milieu trilogy or vintage DeLeo, really. Nonetheless, I think should and why to watch this film. I think yes, definitely. While it's a little bit more even, and I do think it lacks a little bit of energy, particularly in the first and second act, I think it has a fantastic conclusion, and I think it's a very great companion piece to those Milieu films, and I think it's probably the closest film that he has done to them. Some of that is obvious. He's taken like the Louis Bacalov score from Caliber 9, but he's also working with, in my opinion, fairly similar material to that. So Fernando DeLeo, depending on who you ask, is definitely one of the most significant directors of the Italian crime movement that happened in the 70s. But he, in fact, you might even find some people that would call him kind of the signature figure, sort of the Dario Argento of the movement. But I do think you'll probably have a little bit more of a mixed view there. And I think one way that his films are really set apart from kind of some of the other big directors like Castellari or Lenzi, who tended more towards kind of like these rompy, action-y, grindhouse affair, I think his films certainly do have some of that in them, but they're also a little bit more serious. There's definitely a little bit less humor to be taken from them. And I think, in particular, he's influenced a lot by film noir, specifically American film noir. So think of like the films from like Dashiell Hammett, Maltese Falcon, Raymond Chandler, stuff like The Big Sleep. And so I think his plots are a lot more densely and more convoluted. The plotting is just very different, very convoluted, very densely plotted too. And I think compared to people like Damiani or Sollima, he's a little bit less interested in kind of those big issues. And so you're not going to see like a big system takedown like Revolver or kind of criticism of the development or corruption. While that might have some place in his films, I think he's sort of riding a middle ground between sort of those two camps of like Damiani and Lenzi and Castellari and the others. Definitely a pulp sensibility to his stuff, but it's a little bit different than kind of like the very, very 70 grindhouse efforts of some of his colleagues. I will say his films are always tinged with a heavy bit of irony. Knowing what happens in this film in particular, when rewatching it the second time, it plays pretty differently just because you know what ends up happening here and how Cassinelli is basically misreading the situation. So I think the premise is fairly unique, and it's interesting how it takes sort of that mold of Caliber 9 and just basically transforms it and shifts it around quite a bit. Another thing that DeLeo is really interested in too is sort of the gang hierarchy. This is mentioned prominently in one of the good essays. This booklet actually had some very good essays on the film of the gangs, and that's something that I think you're not going to find so much in some of the other poliziotteschi directors. I'm thinking of The Boss and how basically Henry Silva's character needs to like kind of navigate that. You have something similar happening here with Cassinelli trying to like navigate the gang and all the different relationships there. One comparison that the booklet made and someone I've seen make too is one I had not thought of, but it's a film I'm very familiar with, A Better Tomorrow, that came out in Hong Kong in 1986. Surface level, very, very similar story of basically a big robbery going wrong and certain people getting imprisoned and just kind of exploring where people end up and how the loyalties are basically very, very tangled up. That's based off of a story of a discharged prisoner, which is another Hong Kong film, which I've not seen. Interesting. The stylizations of blue are definitely fairly different, but I can definitely see kind of like the basic threadings of the story there. In fact, this film, the second time you watch it, you basically see this as basically Claudio Cassinelli, a very capable man, just screwing up in terms of like his poker reads and not realizing who is actually doing things behind the scenes and reading stuff as being more motivated by sinister forces than by just kind of random chance and bad luck. So it's, in that sense, it's a very interesting and weird inversion of Caliber 9, where in that one, Gaston Molchin's character definitely does some misreading at points, but he is the one that is kind of doing the misdirecting. So I think this does work a little bit against the film, just the obvious comparisons that he's drawing to Caliber 9, just because Caliber 9 is maybe his best film. In fact, I would probably say it's his best. I'm not going to say it's my favorite necessarily. I like Italian Connection just a little bit more, but it is, I think that's something that serves the film in terms of being able to twist those expectations, but also perhaps setting those expectations unrealistically high in terms of bringing those things back. I think this is a very good film that's just not quite on the caliber of Caliber 9. Cassinelli is also an interesting casting choice. He was starting to get really big kind of around the mid-70s. He was in Suspicious Death of a Minor and What Have They Done to Your Daughters, so kind of these two poliziotteschi jolly hybrids. And I think he does have a little bit less energy, and certainly in the first film, Ador in particular brings a lot of different energy to the film. I think this film suffers a little bit by having a little bit lesser character actors here. Nonetheless, it does have probably an upgrade on the mob boss in terms of Martin Balsam, who is, good to bring up a kind of like classy American actor who it's just easy to have a lot of reverence for. He shows up in a lot of these different Italian crime films, and I think he's always usually almost very serviceable at the bare minimum, and I think he's good here. The film is definitely working with a little bit of a lower budget, but one way to make up with a lower budget is just to have really good sets and good locations, rather. And so the office here is a fantastic office that Balsam has, and just kind of the streets of, I think Milan, but yeah, the streets of these Italian cities are just a great setting to have, even if DeLeo lacks kind of the resources that he had 4 or 5 years before. One thing that does really work in the film's favor is that Luis Bacalov score. It really helps keep that pulse of energy. In fact, this time watching it, after seeing a lot of Italian gialli and horror films more recently, it reminded me a little bit of kind of early Fabio Frizzi and sort of that like heavy bass electronic note to it. So I could definitely see this bleeding into the 80s a little bit. So just fantastic score from Bacalov there. And I think the last thing that I really want to highlight that stands out is the ending, which I think is one of the best sequences DeLeo has directed, period. And this is the one that left me kind of exhilarated after my initial watch of the film. And the way that he just twists things. In the end, Cassinelli's character is left alive, but he has nothing left. And that's interesting. That's a very interesting ending that's very cynical, despite kind of leaving everything cleared up, and he's still around, and he has been spared by Balsam's character. Another thing that really strikes me in the ending is just the staging of it is fantastic, where we have Cassinelli basically walking through almost like this car. It almost feels like a horse stable, but there's a lot of cars and just people lined up, and it's just a lot of shadowy figures there, and so he's basically at mercy of Martin Balsam at that point. Who won the movie? Fernando DeLeo. I think it's really a shame that this is kind of his last chance to go back to... Well, I'm actually a fan of some of his later films. Killer vs. Killers is a lot of fun, but it's definitely more of kind of like your 1980s action romp, and doesn't have the same feel as something like his 70s work. So I think this is a good film by DeLeo, so definitely strongly recommend it. Just go in with expectations, not expecting it to be quite on the level of something like Caliber 9. Double feature with this, I would pair this with perhaps a little bit more of a fun comic element of Claudio Cassinelli, and that is Suspicious Death of a Minor. Rating 8 out of 10. I think really, really solid film. I did come down a little bit on it on this viewing, but I think it's very good, and definitely one that I will be revisiting time to time when I check out different DeLeo films. So thank you all for tuning in. I will see you all next time. Cheers.